BYL Nation, this is an emergency podcast. And it's not because we just passed our 3-year anniversary, 3 years in operation. It's not because we're about to launch our third and fourth locations in about 2 weeks' time. And it's not because we're going to soon surpass 1,000 players having suited up for BYL hoops. All of that is great. But we are about to undergo the biggest change to BYL in our 3 years of existence, a new league format. So I am Taylor Pettiford. For those who don't know, I founded BYL Hoops. I'm the OG Adam Silver off the court. I am on the court, Klay Thompson and Boris Diaw's body. But today I'm your podcast host, and I'm going to talk through exactly what's changing in BYL and why you should be excited for it. So I'm going to try to keep things here about 30 minutes or less, but this is a podcast that whether you have played BYL in the past, you're signed up to play this fall, or you're interested in it. And if you're not signed up, why are you on the fence, right? You're going to want to play. In any case, whichever of those three buckets you fall into, you're going to want to listen to this podcast to see what's changing and how the player experience is going to be enhanced. So let me go ahead and share screen here for those who are watching on YouTube. You could probably listen to this as well, all the same. And let's discuss our new league format. Before we move forward, though, I want to take a step back and I want to talk through the historicals. Right? So historically speaking, because there's a lot of people who still have a lot of questions about BYL. What is it? I hear it's a draft league. How's it structured? How does that all work? Right. So yes, we have been branded as, and not just branded as, we have been a draft league. That's kind of our shtick. That's how we were conceived. Every single one of our divisions is draft style. And what that means is if you're a player who's going to play BYL, you sign up, you enter a draft pool. Our hand selected captains then get a randomized draft order. It's snake style. So, let's say we have 8 captains. You go 1 through 8. Whoever has the 8th pick also has the 9th pick, and we go reverse order for the next round. And we basically go through however many rounds are necessary, usually about 7 rounds, to draft all of those players, put them on teams. We play that season. There might be trades. There often are trades, especially in our legacy divisions. There's tons of trades that happen. But then at the end of the season, if you qualified for playoffs, you get to keep a certain number of players going into the next session. The rest of those guys, right, if you don't get kept, you have to re-enter the draft pool the next session and come back in as a draftee. So it's worked well. I mean, the proof is in the growth that we've experienced, right? A lot of guys, this was their first foray into playing in a draft league. And by all accounts, most have thoroughly enjoyed it, right? It's, for me, the reason why I like a draft style league and I decided to start BYL as a draft league is because of the community building aspect of it, right? I've played in all types of leagues and tournaments growing up, and I like to run with my boys. Right? I like to play on the same team as my friends, who understand how I play, where I like to, to fit in on the court, and who let me rock. And I understand the value in that, but I also, I'm a little bit older than most players these days, which is kind of weird for me to think. I don't feel like I got a decade plus on some guys who were on the court, but I'm mid-30s. So for me, growing up, if I went to a park to go hoop, whoever the next 5 up were, that's who played. There was no concept of, hey, I'm going to bring my own 5 and that's who I play with. Otherwise, you're going to be waiting a long time. LeBron changed all of that. Not just LeBron. I know that I'm just trying to irk the LeBron fans out there. But we're living in a different era now where guys want to, that's the most common request that we get is, can I put in a team? I need to play with these players. And, I'm not here to clown, anybody on that. I understand it. It's just not the league that we have been. And transparently, if you've been holding your breath, hoping for the announcement that, hey, this is going to be a bring your own team league, that's not the direction that we're going. So that's not happening here. The value in the draft league, like I said, is community building, right? You're not siloed into, hey, these are my boys that I've known for a long time. I'm going to show up. I'm going to play with them against another team. Going to only interact with them on the court, maybe talk a little trash. We win, we lose, we dip, right? And you just stay siloed within your own team. The beauty of BYL is that you're challenged. You have to really grow as a basketball player because you're thrown into situations where you're playing different styles with different guys and challenged to win on that premise. And to me, there's a little bit more value in that than just, hey, I got a bunch of friends who are really good at basketball and they're going to beat your friends that are really good at basketball. I mean, there's very little strategy in that. BYL is a very strategic league. So, and the vein of building your legacy, which is what BYL stands for, right? You're going to build your team in order to compete and grow. And it's a chess game. But right, some of the challenges that we're facing is players being unhappy with their team, and we understand that. Right. Not everybody's styles are going to coincide. So being unhappy with your team is an occurrence, right? It happens. I'm not going to say it's common or frequent, but every season somebody's going to be in that boat. Guys want to play with their friends. They want to team up. This is the era where that is happening, whether it's at the high school or the AAU level, whether it's at the collegiate level or even in the pro level. Guys want to team up. They want to play with their friends. They want to play with the guys who know how they rock on the court. And then also, when we think about the new locations that we're launching, there's just a lot of skepticism. I've never played BYL. I've never played in a draft league. I want to put in my own team. You're telling me that I can't. I would have to go and draft them. I'm not sure how I feel about that. And while there's a part of me that wants to say, bro, come talk to the hundreds of players that I could have on the phone within a minute who will tell you that this is the real deal and a draft league is legit. I'm not going to push my personal or project my personal opinions all the way on those players. And I do understand the ask. So how do we solve for that? Right? We had to ask that question of ourselves as a business, right? How do we solve for this challenge? Because players are telling us they're skeptical or they don't want to play or they're not going to come back because they can't pick their teams. So we're going to just go to a bring your own team league, right? Is that the route that we're going? No. That's like I said on the last slide, I stole the thunder from here, but we're not going that route. The reason why is, like I said, it creates silos where community building is a lot tougher. I'm not saying it's impossible. Maybe there's some leagues that achieve that. But from my experience and having played in multiple of those, that's just, I have a big goal of building a BYO community, and bring your own team leagues just don't foster that. They don't align with that. The other thing, with bring your own team leagues that personally I'm not a huge fan of, is that there's a dozen other leagues that are styled like that. So if you really need to play with a specific team, then you can go to that league, right? I mean, I'm not going to name them for you, but you can look it up, and within a few minutes, you can find a wide range of leagues where it's just, hey, bring your own team. So it's a bit diluted. It's a bit vanilla in my opinion. There's very little excitement, especially when you consider that it's a year-round league. If it's just like a summer league, and it's a once a year thing, that's cool from a bring your own team style for me. That's why our collegiate division is not draft style. That's a bring your own team, because it's a once a year thing. You can still foster rivalries that way, but when you're going to play 4 sessions in a year, if it's just bring your own team, that gets old after a while. There has to be some type of shakeup. So then we asked ourselves, okay, is the solution then to just stick to our guns, right? I love a draft league. The draft league's been working out really well. We've sold out, I don't even know how many consecutive sessions at Dana Barros. The North, we saw some growth this summer. We got 2 locations lined up. Signups are coming in by the day. Do we just stick to our guns? And in fairness to you guys as the players, as our customers, as members of our community, that's not fair to you either, for us to just sit and stagnate, right? If your league isn't making the proper adjustments for you, then you should probably find one that is. And BYL is that league. So how do we solve for it? Free agency, right? Free agency. So what does that mean for a men's league. And why are you guys doing the most, right? Free agents. I mean, this isn't the NBA. Why can't it be a professional level experience? When we think about the NBA, there's really two paths to building a successful team. I guess three, right? You can build through the draft. You can take the Oklahoma City Thunder route, really build through the draft, accumulate draft picks and assets, make them accordingly, swindle the Los Angeles Clippers and go get Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. That kind of segues into another route. You can make trades. Right? So you can trade your active players or future draft picks in order to acquire players. But the other route is free agency. That's how we see a ton of our current and former champions winning, is via free agency. And so we're going to incorporate that moving forward in BYL. You're probably asking, what does that look like? So let's dip into the particulars, right? The goal of this is to blend our draft roots. I'll just read right off the slide here, right? To blend our draft roots with a free agency replica to maintain competitive balance and continue to promote community building while introducing flexibility that breaks down barriers to entry and makes it easier to get players what they want. It's a lot of words, but what we mean by that is there's a happy medium here. A draft style levels the playing field for teams. It makes it so that it's not so buddy and it also makes it so that there's excitement and there's renewed engagement from one session to the next. And it continues to promote community building. But on the free agency side of things, this is going to break down some barriers to entry. There are some guys who are just not going to enter and play BYL if they cannot play with a specific team. Free agency is going to allow them to do that, provided that their boy wants to pick them up, right? But it's going to break down those barriers to entry and make it easier for you as players to get exactly what you want out of the league. So what is this exactly going to look like? Well, we're going to introduce the concept of contract value. No, we're not going to be paying players to pay, but there is going to be essentially a virtual or simulative contract value that's going to be assessed to players based on their performance. So here's where we're going to get super nerdy here. At the end of the day, nobody aside from myself and aside from our COO, Kenny, and maybe Ian is going to help out with that as well on our social media side of things. But nobody's going to have to bust out a calculator. Nobody's going to have to open up a spreadsheet, get out your pencil and your TI-84 and crunch numbers here. We're going to take care of all of that for you with the help of our partners at Sports Visio, who capture all of our stats. But this is what that calculation is going to look like. It's performance based, and we're going to take at the end of each season, we're going to look at, okay, what were your points per game? And we're going to multiply that by your field goal percentage. So if your field goal percentage was 50%, then we'll take your points per game and we'll times them by 0.5, or essentially cut it in half. Then we'll add that to your rebounds per game. We'll add that number to your assists to turnover ratio, right? Whatever the yield of that is. And in the next slide, we're going to actually walk through what this looks like. So if your head's spinning, or if you're like that meme with all the numbers and calculations going on right now, don't worry. We're going to break it down nice and simple. But we're going to take that, difference between your assists to turnovers per game. And then we'll add in your blocks per game and your steals per game after that. If that number is 20 or greater, you are going to be deemed a max contract player. And you will have a $25 million cap hit towards the captain that wants to sign you. If your number is below 20, but it's greater than 10, right? So it's between essentially 10 and 19.99, you're going to be considered a mid-level player. And you will have a $15 million hit against the captain's cap if he were to sign you. And that's another important thing to establish here, is that there is a concept of like a salary cap, which we might get into in the next block that comes up on here, but that's only going to apply in the off season. So instead of the concept of keepers, there'll be a salary cap that captains have to work with prior to the draft. But anyways, back to this block here, contract values. If a player is, and I should have updated this slide to say below 10, right? So if your score based on this calculation, your contract value is below 10, then you're going to be considered a minimum player, and you'll be a $5 million cap hit to your captain. So 3 different tiers. You either max, mid, or minimum level contract, and that's all based off of your yield from this calculation. All right. So what's changing is that, right now, the way it's set up is that if a team qualifies for playoffs, they get 1 keeper. If they make it to the finals, or to the championship, I should say, they get 2 keepers. And if they win the championship, they get to keep 3. There's no more concept of keepers. Instead, qualifying teams will have a salary cap of contracts to offer. Right? So, for instance, and this isn't official, but this is, just an example here, is if a team qualifies for the playoffs, then they can sign or re-sign $40 million. I should remove that word keep there because there's no more concept of keepers. But they can re-sign players that they had the previous session, or they can sign new eligible free agents up to $40 million. If you're the runner-up, meaning you made the championship, but you didn't win it, you have $65 million to operate with, for instance, and then the champion would have $100 million to operate with. Again, just an example, not official. We will be ironing out those details in the coming days based on your location. But then, as far as how that works with the drafts, because the natural question, might be coming up is there still a draft? So is there still a way for players to enter if they don't have stats to fill out that calculation? And yes, we'll get to that in a few slides. But if you're a max contract player, then you're going to be considered as a first round pick. If there's 2 max contract players that are signed, it'd be a first and a second round pick. Mid levels will start around the 4th round, and then the minimum level players would start at the 6th round, right? Each successive player that you keep in that tier would go, to the next round. So if you keep 2 mid levels, it'd be 4th and 5th, 2 max players, 1st and 2nd, 2 min players, minimum, I should say, players would be 6th and 7th round picks as far as the draft is concerned. So let's just walk through what this looks like in practice, and we're going to take our MVP frontrunner, likely MVP for the Legacy South Division, Mike Ward, Big Mike. So Mike had a monster season, right? We take a look at his season stats. He averaged 25.5 points per game on 44% field goal shooting. He had a 10.9 rebounds per game, 1.3 assists per game, 1.9 turnovers per game, and then 0.6 steals and blocks per game. So if we were to take a look at that calculation here, we would essentially do 25.5, the points per game. We would times that by 0.44 and get that number. We would add that number to 10.9 for the rebounds per game. Then when we take a look at the assists and turnovers, he actually had more turnovers than assists. So we would subtract 0.6 from where we're at, and then add on 0.6 and 0.6 for the steals and for the blocks. I hope that you're watching on YouTube and not just listening to this, because it probably makes a lot more sense if you're able to visualize it. But if we were to run that calculation, or when we run that calculation here, that gives Mike a contract value of 22.72. So if you'll remember from the previous slide here, that means that he's a max contract player, which is no mystery to everybody. I mean, everybody knows that that Mike is a max contract player, but anybody who wants to sign him via free agency is going to have to use $25 million of their allotted free agency money or salary cap in order to sign him. And he would essentially count then as your 1st round draft pick. So it's similar to the keeper style, right? But a little bit different from the standpoint that, if you had enough to work with, you could go sign Mike and you could sign another returnee that was, fit into that max contract tier there, right? Maybe a DJ Beckford, right, who I think was the highest performing contract value player from this past session. You could sign both of them if you had enough salary cap to do so. Whereas it's probably unlikely that you go get both of those guys via the draft. But if they wanted to team up and they wanted to be the legacy South version of the late 90s Spurs with the Twin Towers, then they could do that. But that's how the calculation works. That's what's going to be happening behind the scenes here. But again, this really only matters in the off season. In season, we're not going to be calculating this and seeing is your team above or below the salary cap, you got to drop this, but that's not how it's working. This is strictly for the off season. But the off season is going to be spicy, right? Because players are going to have to make decisions. There's no more concept of like, hey, this captain drafted this player and now they just want to keep him, so they just get to keep him, even though that was never the intent of the rule. It was always the player's decision whether they wanted to be kept or not. A lot of guys didn't know that, or a lot of guys felt awkward to enforce that. Now it's free agency, so both parties have to agree. Maybe a player wants to return, but the captain wants to go get somebody else. That could happen too. But the power really sits with the players now, because they're able to make that decision to say, hey, I want to change the scenery. I want to go team up with this captain or with this team. As long as they have salary cap to do so, they can make that happen. So what about the draft? It seems like is the draft just out the window? No, it's not going anywhere, but it's going to look a little bit different. And it's going to look different because the draft is going to be exclusively for brand new players who have not played BYL before, players who have sat out a session and now are returning, and players who, maybe they wanted to test the free agency waters, weren't able to come to an agreement with any of the teams, and now don't have anywhere to go. And provided that they, paid on time, then they will be entered into the draft along with those new players and, returning players that have sat out for a session. So that's how the draft's going to look different. There is incentive, though, to building through the drafts. I know at this point you might just be thinking, like, I'm just going to go gung-ho as a captain in the free agency market, because that's the path of least resistance. I don't want to have to sit there and wait for, ping pong ball drawings and seeing where I'm going to draft, etc. And that strategy might work for some. For others, right, they might want to take the long game and build through the draft, because there is a contract clause that makes it very, very enticing to do so. And that is the rookie extension. So players who are selected in a specific round of a draft, they can be re-signed in that round's contract tier for up to 4 consecutive seasons. So the same as in the NBA, a rookie comes out. So Victor Wembanyama, right? Already he's performing as a max contract player in the NBA. But the San Antonio Spurs are not paying him $50 million a year like they're paying Steph Curry, right? They're paying a much lower amount than that, and they're going to be able to do so for a few seasons because he's on a rookie contract. Now, they'll probably have to extend him much sooner than most rookies would get extended. But in any case, the perfect example to use here is for anybody who followed the Legacy South Division. I think it was earlier this year, the Mustangs drafted a player by the name of Carlucci Paul. Carlucci, if you're out there, if you're listening, we hope that you come back this session, right? But Carlucci should have been an elite player. He ended up in Legacy. Not only did he end up in Legacy, he fell to the 5th round because nobody knew who he was. He proceeded to just ball out on everybody in the league, won the MVP. I don't know his exact stats, but it was, somewhere upwards of, 20 points per game, over 5 rebounds, over 5 assists, over a block, over a steal per game. He was just clear cut best player in the division that session. And based off of the calculation, would have been well above 20, the yields between those, because he was pretty efficient on top of all of that. So in a normal scenario, if he had been signed via free agency, then he would have been a $25 million cap hit for his captain, Ian Hare, to keep the following session. To incentivize building through the draft, though, if this was today, he would have been able to be kept or re-signed, I should say, via to the Mustangs for up to 4 consecutive seasons as a mid-level player, because that's where he was drafted, right? So he would stay at that $15 million cap hit, which obviously is uh, uh, a no-brainer for his captain, GM, I guess we could call him now, to resign, but also for Carlucci, because now that the team has extra cap space, they won the championship, so they would have had $100 million to work with in free agency. He could have said, hey, my boy plays on this other team. Even if he was a max contract player, you probably have space to go sign him and probably sign another. So you could have had Carlucci and 2 other max guys and still filled out the rest of your roster, right? So that's how the strategic side of things is really going to work. You can go free agency and try to make sure that you keep guys happy and re-sign every single session. But if somebody hits a lick in the draft, like the Mustangs did with Carlucci Paul, then they could have a major cheat code on their hands. So, getting guys through the draft is still going to be a very effective strategy. So from a player experience standpoint, this is how it's going to work. So if you are a player that is playing or considering playing BYL hoops this upcoming fall session, you join BYL for the first time. You're going to come in as a rookie. You're going to enter the draft pool. You get drafted to a team. And let's just say, your averages at the end of the season were 12 points per game, 55% field goals, 4 rebounds, 3 assists, a turnover, a steal, and half a block per game. That would put your postseason value, your contract value, at 16.1, which would make you a mid-level player. So if your captain wants to re-sign you, they can do that. You would have to agree. And if you do, then you'd count as a $15 million player towards that captain's cap space. I said 100 million. That's only if you won the championship, but let's just pretend that you did win the championship, right? So you'd be $15 million player. Now, one thing that I didn't cover here is it really depends on where you were drafted, though, because if for some reason everybody slept on you and you were drafted 6th round or 7th round and you put up those numbers, then your captain could keep you for $5 million. So I said 15 in the example here. Again, that's assuming that you were taken within one of the first 5 rounds. So at that point, you as the player have the choice. And again, that's an important piece that I really want to emphasize and drive home, is that it is your choice now as the player to either re-sign or hit free agency. You averaged 12 points per game on 55% field goals. To me, that seems like you were in a pretty good situation, but maybe you feel like you can go get 20 somewhere else. And you have assurances from a captain that you're going to be an integral part of the offense over there. You have the choice now to go and hit free agency. Now, I don't want to throw too many scenarios here to get guys' heads spinning, but you also have to be strategic as a player and think about, I assume everybody's chief goal is to win a championship. At least I would hope so. Maybe it's not, though. Maybe you just want to, maybe you just want to go get your buckets. You want to, get an all-league performer, uh, status. That's cool too. I'm more championship minded, so I don't really jive with that, but that's fine. To each his own. But you got to be strategic as a player in thinking about, okay, I was drafted 6th round. My captain here could keep me for $5 million, and I could join forces with him to help recruit players to come join us with that cap space. Whereas if I go somewhere else, now I'm going to count 3 times that towards the cap. And how much cap does that captain have to work with, right? To go sign other players. Who's going to be built around me? From a draft and free agency perspective. So players, I strongly encourage that you don't just automatically say, hey, this dude is my friend, I want to go hoop with him. Does your hoop style align with him? And what are his plans for the organization, for the team, right? Because it's more than just, hey, we want to team up and hoop. Do you have a realistic shot at a championship with that team's current structure and uh, projection? So then, if wherever you sign, and then then your contract value is going to be reassessed after the next season. I mentioned it on a previous slide, but one other thing to keep in mind is if you take a season off, though, you do have to re-enter as a rookie and you need to go through the draft. We'll figure out how the injury situation works and how long captains can sort of retain the right to either like a rookie extension or sign via free agency a player who goes down to injury. But we don't have that answer right now, transparently. So I do want to say one thing before I get to the next slide, actually, is that you're going to have to bear with us, right? I appreciate everybody's patience and understanding. We're doing this for you. We want this to be a better player experience. We want players to be armed with more choice as to who they play with and where they play. We also want players to be more involved in the team building process, right? Like if you're going to sign somewhere, you should know what that captain's plans are for the draft, for free agency, etc. So we want that sort of, in tandem. It's not just all the captain or, GM, whatever you want to call them these days. But we're not going to have the answer to every scenario right now. We'll never get the answer to every scenario until those scenarios come up. So there's just some answers. I mean, please send any questions that you have our way. If we have the answers for you, we'll share them. If we don't, we'll get there, right? We'll deliberate and we'll take your suggestions too under serious consideration. Proof of us taking suggestions under serious consideration is the fact that we implemented the keeper rule and now we're implementing free agency and we're no longer just a draft league. We are a modern experience type of a league. But the big question on everybody's minds, when is this happening, right? We're going to start the new year off with this happening right now. Fall 2024 for the North, the Central, Connecticut, and Southern divisions. All divisions of BYL. This is effective immediately at the time that you are watching this. This is September 5th, 2024, effective immediately. I don't think we're ever going to turn back from it. BYL is no longer just a draft league. It is a free agent sort of pro hybrid replica type of a league. It is unique. I can almost promise that your league is not this in depth on the team building side of things. So captains go out there and recruit, players go out there and recruit. Let's get to it and start building these teams. So how it's going to work is for the South and the North, because we already have champions deemed and we have teams who have either qualified for playoffs or so on and so forth. We're going to be closer to the structure that we talked about here on the podcast and in this deck. But for Central and Connecticut, the decision was made that captains for both divisions at both of those locations this one time, right? It won't be this way every session. You won't get an automatic, but to start, you will have $70 million of cap space to work with. So if you're a captain, or if you're thinking of being a captain, because I think for every division at each of those locations, we have captain spots available. So you can slide in the DMs, so you can hit up Kenny. You're going to have $70 million of cap space to work with. So if you do the math there, right, that means that you could go get 2 prospective max players, a mid-level player, and your friend who's a good role player and knows how to work with you guys, but would be considered a minimum player, right? You could put 4 players together like that. Or you could go out, you could get 1 max guy, you could get 2 mid-level guys who are really strong contributors. That right there puts you, actually, you get 3 mid-level guys and a minimum, right? You can go get 4 mid-level guys and 2 minimums, and then you got 6 players, and you just go get a stud via the draft. You'd have a first-round draft pick still left, right? The possibilities there are, I don't want to say endless, but you got a lot of possibilities for how you build out your team, and you can really go and, build your team the way that you desire in a way that you probably aren't going to have full flexibility to do in future sessions. So take advantage. If you want to come in with a specific team, again, we don't have endless spots left. We have probably 1 to 2 spots for each division. So if you want to come in and you want to build a team, you've got guys that you want to rock with. You've been waiting to play BYL, but you've been on the sidelines because you can't bring your own team in. Now you essentially can. You essentially can. You won't be able to build up probably your full roster that way, but you can build out most of it and then tell the one guy who gets left out, like, hey, just enter the draft and we'll scoop you, right? We got you. So take advantage of that. It's not going to be as flexible every season, but it will be obviously more flexible than it's historically been. And hey, if you go and win the championship, then you probably can bring everybody back. So $70 million for Central and for Connecticut. No, anybody in the South, don't come asking, can we get 70 million as well? Yours is going to be merit based off of how you performed in the past sessions, and same for up north. Paris, Lucas, and Kenny will discuss that with you, the particulars there. The question probably comes into place. I'm just going to address it here so we don't get tons of DMs. Like, how will you know without stats who's a max player and who's a mid-level player and who's a minimum? It's not going to be a perfect science. We ask that captains don't try to come and hit a lick and say, hey, I want to sign this guy for a minimum. And then he comes out and he's a, 6'2", D1 player that, just got off of playing pro and comes in averaging, 25, 5-5 for the session. Like, we're going to ask, on an honor system, but we are going to evaluate those players based off of their resume, collegiately and professionally. We will base it off of, any intel that we can scrub from internet and social media. And then we're going to ask around as well and try to get opinions from guys who are not biased about that. So again, won't be perfect. In future sessions, it won't be much of an issue because we're going to have to, we'll base it off of statistical performance. And then if you're a new guy, then you have to come in via the draft. But for this first session, hey, bear with us. But the reality is everybody's essentially got an equal opportunity because you've got the same amount of money for those new locations to work with. But all that's left is sign up, right? Actually, don't follow 2 Chainz, right? Don't follow 2 Chainz example here, talking about sign me up. Just go sign up, right? Because if you hit me up, I got players, my boy Kevin Merville, that's my man, right? But Kev, every single session hits me up. Hey, sign me up for the South. Sign me up for this location. And I have to tell him every single session, Kev, I can't sign you up. You literally have to go fill it out. It takes 1 minute though. It takes 1 minute. And he does it, to Kev's credit. He always does it. But I can't sign anybody up. Kenny can't sign anybody up. Your commissioner, your boy, they can't sign you up. You have to go sign up. It's out on the website that's listed right here, buildsports.com/registration. It's also in the link in the bio on, I don't know why I said a link like that, but it's on the link in the bio on Instagram. And you can go sign up out there. So, fellas, it is September 5th. Sessions start on September 22nd. Drafts are not next week, but the week after. So the drafts really start in just over 10 days. So getting a lot of verbal commitment, like, oh yeah, I'm gonna play. I'm definitely gonna play. Take 1 minute, please. I don't care when you take that minute, whether it's on your lunch break, whether it's when you park your car in the driveway and you come home from work, whether you're on the toilet, right? Take 1 minute, go out there and fill out the form. It's like name, email address, phone number, and what your height is and stuff like that. It takes no time, but just sign up, because the verbal commitments, I love them, but at the same time drive me nuts. Because then we're trying to game plan for head count, and we got all these dudes that are saying that they're going to play, and they're going to be in the DMs like, oh, why didn't I get a spot? Why didn't I get a spot? When dudes come flooding in and swoop in and steal those spots because they signed up before you. So just take the 1 minute, sign up for us, and we'll see you on the court September 22nd.